Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know how much we love getting your requests, and this one is, well, let's just say it's got some real teeth.
Hmm. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. So based on your feedback, we are diving into animals a rhino could fight, and we've got this awesome list from the top10s.com to kind of guide us.
Sounds intriguing. I'm already picturing some epic
I
clashes.
know, right? I mean, just the idea of a rhino going up against, well, some of these animals is just wild.
Like you said, it's the top10s.com. So we know there's going to be some, shall we say, creative interpretations.
Definitely. And that's part of the fun, right? Getting to explore these hypothetical battles, seeing how different animals stack up against a rhino.
Exactly. It's all about exploring the possibilities. And who knows, maybe we'll even learn something new along the way.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of learning, before we jump into the list, let's talk about what makes rhinos such formidable opponents in the first place. What are their strengths going into these matchups?
Well, right off the bat, you had to consider their size. Rhinos are massive creatures, some species weighing in at over 2 tons.
Wow, 2 tons. That's like heavier than a car.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got that incredibly thick hide. It's essentially like wearing armor, offering protection from bites, claws, even some blunt force trauma.
So size and armor are definitely in the rhino's corner. But what about weaponry? I mean, they've got those iconic horns.
Oh, absolutely. Those horns are not just for show. They can inflict some serious damage, especially when wielded by an animal of that size and strength. We're talking about potentially fatal blows with a single, well-aimed charge.
So they're not just tanks, they've got some serious firepower too. And what about temperament? Does that factor into how they might approach a fight?
Absolutely. Rhinos, despite being herbivores, they're not exactly known for being docile. They can be quite aggressive, especially when they feel threatened or their territory is encroached upon.
I can imagine a 2 ton animal with a horn coming at you. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that.
Right. So, while they may primarily graze on plants, underestimate a rhino's willingness to fight at your peril.
Definitely a force to be reckoned with. All right, with all that in mind, let's get into this list, shall we? And first up, we've got the buffalo. Now, according to the top tens, the rhino is likely to win this one, citing its heavier weight, thicker skin, and, well, as we've just discussed, more aggressive nature. But is it really that simple?
Well, not quite. I mean, yes, those factors certainly give the rhino an edge, but we need to be a bit more specific here. Are we talking about African buffalo or North American bison? Because the list doesn't specify.
Oh, that's a good point. There's a definite size difference between those two.
Exactly. And size, as we've already established, can be a significant factor in these kinds of matchups. Bison, for example, are considerably larger than African buffalo. That added bulk could definitely even the odds a bit.
So even against a rhino, size still matters. Interesting. Okay, moving on to some, well, let's call them the heavy hitters on this list. The hippopotamus and the elephant.
Ah, yes, now we're talking about the titans of the savannah.
Talk about size. Both hippos and elephants absolutely dwarf even the largest rhino species. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything taking them down.
And you'd be right to think that. In terms of sheer size and weight, they're on a league of their own. It's fascinating to think that, the hippopotamus and the elephant, they're actually the two heaviest land animals in all of Africa.
Wow, I didn't know that. That really puts things into perspective.
Right. So when you're picturing a potential confrontation with a rhino, it's important to remember that scale.
Yeah, no kidding. So I guess in a rhino versus hippo or elephant situation, it's pretty much game over for the rhino.
Well, game over might be a bit strong, but it would undoubtedly be a monumental challenge for even the toughest rhino. Both hippos and elephants possess the size and strength to potentially overcome even a rhino's impressive defenses.
So not a guaranteed win for the rhino there.
Okay, how about big cats? We've got lions, tigers, and jaguars all on the list. The top 10 seems to favor the rhino in these matchups as well, but I can't help but wonder, could the agility of a lion or the power and ferocity of a tiger or a jaguar actually pose a threat to a rhino?
Hmm. Well, it's true. Big cats are apex predators, incredibly strong and agile, and they're definitely designed to take down large prey.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
But there's a big but here. Size does matter, and the size difference between a big cat and a rhino is substantial. That kind of puts them at a disadvantage right from the start. A lone big cat probably wouldn't even think about picking a fight with a rhino unless it was really desperate.
Yeah, makes sense. It'd be like trying to tackle a tank.
Yeah.
Speaking of mismatches, this list has some real curveballs. I mean, gorillas, kangaroos, crocodiles.
Hmm.
Against a rhino, I'm not sure I see how those would even be a fair fight. I'll admit, those matchups are a bit more, shall we say, unexpected. But that's what makes this list so intriguing. It really makes you think about animal battles in a different way. I mean, we tend to focus on brute strength, but there's so much more to it than that.
No, definitely. Like you were saying earlier, different animals have evolved different strategies for survival.
Exactly. So while a gorilla might possess incredible strength, or a kangaroo might have those powerful kicks, or a crocodile that incredible bite force, the rhino's size and armor would be incredibly difficult to overcome.
So it sounds like in most of these matchups, size and armor are giving the rhino a pretty clear advantage. But there's always more to the story, right? I mean, factors like agility, strategy, even who initiates the confrontation can play a role.
Absolutely. These hypothetical battles are fun to consider, but the reality is things are far more complex in the wild. We can't just look at stats on a chart and declare a winner.
It's like a real-life game of chess, with each animal having its own unique moves and strategies.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying animal behavior so fascinating. There's always more to learn, always another layer of complexity to uncover.
Yeah, and that's what makes this deep dive so much fun. So we've talked about some of the more obvious contenders, but this list has a few more surprises up its sleeve.
Oh yeah, we're just getting started. There are a couple of matchups on here that are really going to make you think twice about who has the upper hand against a rhino.
Well, now I'm really intrigued. Let's dive into those next. All right. So we've talked about the heavy hitters like elephants and hippos, and even those agile predators like big cats. But this list, I mean, it just throws in some real curveballs. Animals that on the surface seem like they wouldn't stand a chance against a rhino. I'm talking about the kangaroo.
The kangaroo, yeah, that one definitely caught my eye.
I mean, a kangaroo versus a rhino?
Yeah.
Really?
It does seem like a mismatch at first glance. But we got to remember kangaroos pack a serious punch.
Yeah,
Literally.
yeah, those kicks are legendary. I've seen videos that.
Exactly. Those powerful hind legs, those can deliver devastating blows. We're talking broken bones, internal injuries, the whole 9 yards.
So I guess my question is there any scenario, however unlikely, where a kangaroo could actually use that kicking power to its advantage against a charging rhino? I mean, what would that even look like?
Well, I think environment and the element of surprise would be key here. If a kangaroo could somehow use the terrain to its advantage, maybe getting close without being detected, and deliver a well-placed kick to a vulnerable area like the rhino's belly or legs,
Ooh, that's gotta hurt.
yeah, it could definitely inflict some serious damage. But let's be real here. The odds are still stacked against the kangaroo. I mean, a rhino's size and that thick hide, that's a lot of protection to overcome.
Yeah.
And we haven't even factored in the rhino's own offensive capabilities.
Yeah, true. It'd be like a David and Goliath situation, only with a lot more kicking involved.
Exactly. So, while it's fun to imagine a kangaroo pulling off an upset, I wouldn't bet on it happening in a real-world encounter.
All right, fair enough. So moving on to another unlikely contender, and one that actually does share a habitat with rhinos in some parts of the world, the crocodile.
Ah, the crocodile. Now that's a creature with a reputation.
For good reason. I mean, that bite force is legendary. Isn't it like one of the strongest in the animal kingdom?
Absolutely. Pound for pound, crocodiles have some of the most powerful bites on the planet. Those jaws are designed to clamp down with incredible pressure. We're talking crushing bones, tearing through flesh, the whole deal.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying to think about.
Right. So in this hypothetical matchup, the question is, could that bite force actually penetrate a rhino's thick hide? I mean, we're talking about some serious armor here.
That's what I'm wondering. Could a crocodile actually get a grip that would allow it to inflict a serious injury?
It's a tough one. While that bite force is undeniable, the rhino's hide would offer some protection. For a crocodile to stand a chance, it would have to target a more vulnerable area like the legs or the underbelly. Plus, we got to remember, rhinos are powerful animals themselves. They wouldn't just lie down and take it. They'd fight back, and that could be really bad news for the crocodile.
Yeah, I can imagine a rhino thrashing around trying to dislodge a crocodile from its leg. That wouldn't be pretty.
Definitely not. So it's a high-risk, high-reward situation for the crocodile. Potentially deadly for both animals involved, to be honest.
Okay, so we've talked about kangaroos, we've talked about crocodiles, but looking at this list, I'm noticing one animal that's kind of conspicuously absent.
Oh, and who might that be?
Bears. We've got grizzlies, polar bears, brown bears, all known for their size and strength. Why do you think they're missing from this rhino rumble?
That's a good observation. It's possible the list creator focused specifically on animals that share a habitat with rhinos, which would exclude most bear species.
Ah, that makes sense.
But even in a purely hypothetical sense, a bear versus a rhino would be a fascinating matchup. Imagine the power those two animals could bring to the table.
Right. A grizzly bear squaring off against a rhino. Whose strength would actually prevail? I mean, that's a battle for the ages.
I mean, on the one hand, bears are incredibly powerful creatures. Sharp claws, a ferocious bite, built for taking down large prey.
Yeah, they're not messing around.
But on the other hand, bears are also incredibly diverse. A smaller black bear going up against a rhino would be a totally different scenario than a massive polar bear.
Right, so size matters again.
Exactly. It always comes back to the details, doesn't it? The individual size, the age, even the personality of the animals involved.
It's not as simple as just saying bear versus rhino. It's like with all these matchups, there are so many factors that could influence the outcome.
Exactly. And that's what makes these discussions so engaging. It's not about finding a definitive winner. It's about exploring the possibilities, considering the complexities of animal behavior, and appreciating the incredible diversity of life on this planet.
I'm totally with you on that. This whole deep dive has really shifted my perspective on how to think about animal encounters. It's not just about who's bigger or stronger. It's about all these amazing adaptations that have allowed these creatures to survive and thrive in their environments.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So speaking of real-world encounters, I think it's time to bring it back to our listeners. We've given them a lot to chew on.
We have. Now it's their turn to apply what they've learned.
Okay, so we've gone through this whole list of animals, explored their strengths and weaknesses, and how they might fare against a rhino in a fight.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
No kidding. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is just realizing how complex these encounters really are.
Exactly. It's not as
Right.
simple as just saying rhino wins or lion loses. There's so much more to consider.
Right, like the environment, individual size differences, even just dumb luck can play a role.
It's about appreciating those nuances, those adaptations that have allowed these animals to survive for millions of years.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, we want to throw this one back to you, our listeners. If you had to pick one animal from this list, just one, that you think would have the best chance against a rhino in a real-world encounter, who would it be?
And more importantly, why? Think about everything we've talked about today. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their behavior, their environment.
What strategies could they use? What vulnerabilities in the rhino could they exploit?
There's no right or wrong answer here. We just want to hear your thought process.
Exactly. Hit us up in the comments and let us know your pick and your reasoning. We're seriously curious to hear what you guys come up with.
This whole deep dive has been a blast, and hopefully you've all learned a thing or two about these incredible animals.
Like just how diverse and fascinating the animal kingdom really is.
Every creature has its own unique story to tell, its own way of surviving and thriving.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep those deep dive requests coming. Until next time.